Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to tackle the ultimate head scratcher?
Oh, you know it.
Today, we're going deep on the meaning of life.
That's right.
If you're feeling brave enough to join us, hit that like button and subscribe.
We're not messing around, folks.
We've got a mountain of sources to dig through, everything from Aristotle to the Dalai Lama.
Bible verses to existentialism, oh my.
But here's the thing.
It's not like there's a single right answer to this meaning of life business.
Yeah, it's more like,
Think of it like a kaleidoscope.
ooh, I like that.
All these different perspectives shimmering through history.
And we're here to, guide you through it all.
Exactly. We'll hit those key takeaways, and you'll leave feeling like you've got a PhD in philosophy.
Minus the student debt, of course.
Of course. So, where do we even begin with this massive question?
Well, let's kick things off with some ancient wisdom.
Sounds good to me.
We've got those hedonists, Aristippus and Epicurus.
Pleasure and happiness, that was their jam. The ultimate goals.
But even within hedonism, there are some variations.
Wow, whoa, absolutely.
Aristippus, he's like, indulge in every pleasure you can. Go for it.
Live it up. But then you have Epicurus, who, while still all about pleasure, had a bit more of a
A chill approach.
Yes, he was all about the long game, those enduring pleasures that lead to lasting happiness.
So not just, eating all the cake in sight.
No, no, no. More like choosing the cake that will truly satisfy you in the long run.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Don't want to end up with a stomachache.
Exactly. Epicurus was all about maximizing pleasure while minimizing pain over time.
Smart. So what's the key takeaway here?
Well, chasing after every fleeting pleasure that pops up might not lead to a truly fulfilling life.
Makes you think, right? Then there's Schopenhauer, the king of pessimism, who also considered himself a hedonist.
Right. He's got this fascinating take on hedonism. He believed true happiness came from, get this, lowering your expectations.
Lowering them. So aiming low.
Kind of, because for him, happiness was about the absence of pain.
So instead of chasing those super highs, he's saying, chill out. Be content with what you've got.
You got it. He figured if you set the bar low, you're less likely to be disappointed. And let's face it, how often do our expectations set us up for disappointment?
All the time. But I wonder, if you're always lowering the bar, does that stop you from reaching your full potential?
Excellent point. Schopenhauer's philosophy really makes you think. Is it always better to aim for the stars, or can contentment lie in accepting what is?
Deep stuff. Then we got Aristotle, who was all about eudaimonia.
Ah, yes. Eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing. It goes beyond just, feeling happy.
So living your best life.
In a way, yes. For Aristotle, it was about living virtuously, reaching your full potential as a human being. Think about those times you're completely absorbed in something, using your skills to the max. That's eudaimonia in action.
Makes sense. So it's aligning your actions with your values and going for excellence in everything you do.
Exactly. And this pursuit of eudaimonia finds a parallel in the Bhagavad Gita's concept of svadharma. Swadharma.
It emphasizes fulfilling your unique duty in life. Not just your job, but understanding your place in the grand scheme of things and how you can best contribute.
Okay, so even the ancients were wrestling with these big questions of meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. And their wisdom reminds us, maybe living a meaningful life is about figuring out our strengths and values and using those to make a real contribution.
A contribution that feels authentic, right? Not just going through the motion.
Exactly. But then we fast forward a few centuries and things get a bit, existential.
Oh, yeah, existentialism. That's a whole different ballgame.
Talk about a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Existentialism throws out the idea of a preset meaning to life.
Like, there's no instruction manual.
Nope. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the big names in existentialism, famously said, "We are condemned to be free."
Condemned to be free. That sounds a little scary.
It is.
Yeah.
But also super liberating. Existentialists argue there's no cosmic blueprint, no divine purpose waiting for us to discover.
So we're not just searching for meaning, we're actually creating it. You got it. And that can be both thrilling and terrifying because there are no guarantees.
Makes sense. But then what about free will? Do we really get to choose our own path, or is it all predetermined?
Free will. The ultimate philosophical rabbit hole. But William James, the pragmatist, offers a cool perspective.
Okay, I'm listening.
He argued that even if we can't prove free will exists for sure, choosing to believe in it is a powerful act of self-determination.
So it's not about just accepting fate passively, but actively choosing to believe we can make a difference.
Exactly. If we want to craft a meaningful life, it helps to believe we have at least some say in the matter.
It's like taking the wheel. Right.
Exactly. So we've got ancient wisdom telling us to live virtuously and find our purpose, and then existentialism urging us to create our own meaning.
Now, what about relationships? How do those factor into all of this?
Relationships are essential, no doubt about it, and they pop up all over our sources. Aristotle, for example, was all about soulmates.
So it's like finding the one.
That's the idea. He envisioned two people becoming a single soul.
Wow. Intense. But Elaine de Botton takes a more grounded approach, I think.
Yeah, de Botton suggests love and friendship are more about learning and growing together.
So it's less about finding the perfect match and more about choosing partners who, like, help us become better people.
Exactly. Think about people you admire. Chances are they've been shaped by the relationships in their lives. We learn from each other, challenge each other, support each other.
It's like those relationships shape who we become.
Right, absolutely. And what about those old friendships, the ones that have seen it all?
Ah, yes. The friends you can just be yourself with no matter what.
Those are priceless. Emerson wrote about this beautifully, describing how old friendships connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
It's that feeling of shared history, right? Like you've been through so much together, words aren't even necessary.
Exactly. Those connections can bring so much meaning to our lives. But let's face it, not all relationships are sunshine and roses.
That's for sure.
And that's where someone like La Rochefoucauld, the cynic, steps in.
Oh boy. The cynic.
He believed that even in the closest bonds, self-interest is always at play.
Sounds a bit harsh, but I guess it makes sense when you think about setting boundaries in relationships.
Exactly. Recognizing that our needs and the needs of our loved ones don't always perfectly align, that's essential for healthy relationships.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Between being close and having your own space.
Precisely. And those ideas actually connect to the bigger picture of individual fulfillment versus the greater good.
That's a good transition. Because how do we balance our own wants with the needs of others? Especially in today's world.
Well, that's where Peter Singer comes in with his thought-provoking moral dilemmas. Imagine this. You're walking by a pond and see a child drowning. You could easily save them, but it would ruin your new shoes. What do you do?
Save the child, obviously. Shoes are replaceable, a life isn't.
Exactly. But Singer uses this to highlight a choice we face every day. We could donate to charities that save lives, but we often spend that money on things we don't really need. It's a challenge to think about our priorities. Are we putting our comfort above the well-being of others?
Powerful point.
Yeah.
But how do we even define the greater good? Is it about maximizing happiness for everyone, like utilitarianism says?
Utilitarianism is interesting, but it gets complicated fast. And then Joshua Green adds another layer with his work on tribalism. He argues that we're wired to favor our own group over outsiders, which makes a global ethic really tough.
So our instinct to protect our own tribe clashes with the need for a just world for everyone.
Exactly. Green suggests we need to develop what he calls metamorality.
Metamorality.
It's a system that acknowledges our tribal instincts while allowing us to make more rational and impartial decisions about those outside our circle, like expanding our definition of tribe to include all of humanity.
Sounds idealistic, but crucial for tackling things like climate change and inequality.
Totally agree. And then we've got Derek Parfit and his mind-bending work on personal identity. He asks, what makes you over time?
Ooh, that is mind-bending. Is it our memories, our personality, the things we believe in?
Exactly. Parfit argues our identity is always in flux, always changing, not some static soul or essence, and that has huge implications for responsibility and punishment.
So, if we're always evolving, can we be held accountable for our past selves, especially if we've changed a lot?
That's the question. It challenges our traditional notions of justice. Should punishment always be about retribution, or is there room for rehabilitation?
Whoa, this is getting heavy. I think we need to shift gears to something a bit more, well, mystical.
I was just thinking the same thing. Let's dive into the world of spirituality and the unknowable.
I am ready to explore the spiritual side of the meaning of life.
Yeah.
Where do we begin?
How about the book of Ecclesiastes? It offers a pretty bleak perspective, suggesting that everything is ultimately meaningless.
Meaningless. Oof. That's even a bit dark for deep dive.
It's a reminder that everything is temporary, that chasing worldly things might be futile. But then there's Pascal, who looked at the universe and felt this overwhelming awe and wonder.
Talk about a complete turnaround.
Right. Pascal highlights this paradox. We're these finite beings in an infinite universe. It's terrifying, but also exhilarating. It suggests there are mysteries we'll never fully grasp. And maybe that's where meaning lies.
Okay, now we're getting into existential wonder territory. But how do you reconcile those two, the meaninglessness of Ecclesiastes and the awe of Pascal?
That's where thinkers like Wittgenstein come in. He argued that the meaning of life, that sense of eternity, is right here, right now.
So, back to Carpe Diem. Seize the day and forget the big questions.
It's a bit more nuanced than that. Wittgenstein suggests that by fully inhabiting the present moment, we can transcend time and connect to something larger than ourselves. It's not about ignoring the big questions, but finding the answers in everyday experience.
I like that. Finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Exactly. And speaking of the extraordinary, let's talk about A.J. Ayer, the staunch atheist who had a near-death experience that shook his worldview.
Oh, now that's a story I want to hear.
Ayer was all about logical positivism, a philosophy that rejects anything you can't empirically prove. But after his near-death experience, he reported seeing a divine being and admitted it softened his stance on the afterlife.
Wow. So even the biggest skeptics can have their beliefs challenged by profound experiences.
Absolutely. Ayer's story reminds us that the meaning of life isn't just an intellectual puzzle to be solved. It's something deeply personal, shaped by our values and experiences.
So we've journeyed from ancient wisdom to existentialism, explored relationships, and dipped our toes into the spiritual realm. Now for the final frontier,
Bring it on.
the age of AI. Will the meaning of life change in this brave new world of intelligent machines? Will robots be pondering existential questions alongside us?
That's the million-dollar question, right? We don't have a crystal ball, but our sources offer some hints about the potential pitfalls and the possibilities.
Okay, let's start with the potential downsides.
Well, Lame Deer, a Lakota medicine man, critiqued our obsession with material things and our disconnect from nature.
He was worried that would lead to a hollow existence.
Exactly. And it echoes Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich, where the main character realizes on his deathbed that he wasted his life chasing status and wealth.
A classic cautionary tale. So too much technology and consumerism could lead us down a path of, like, existential emptiness.
It's a real concern. But there's also a flip side. Think about AI's potential to solve huge problems.
True. AI could revolutionize healthcare, education, even our understanding of the universe. Maybe it can even help us crack the code of consciousness.
Perhaps. But even without those big revelations, there are sources that offer a more grounded hope.
Like who?
The Dalai Lama. He emphasizes compassion and ethical living no matter the tech advancements. Technology is a tool, and it's up to us to use it wisely.
That resonates with me. Technology shouldn't replace our humanity, it should enhance it.
Exactly. And then there's Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, who taught us that meaning can be found even in the face of suffering.
Frankl's work is so powerful. He shows us that even when we've lost everything, we still have the freedom to choose our attitude and find purpose.
His message is so relevant today, especially when the world can feel chaotic and overwhelming.
So the age of AI presents both risks and opportunities. It's on us to ensure technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as we keep exploring this whole meaning of life thing, we'll see that this theme of agency, of making conscious choices, is crucial for navigating not just tech, but the very essence of being human.
I'm ready for the next leg of our journey. Where do we go from here?
Let's shift our focus from the vastness of the universe to something a bit closer to home. The human experience of laughter and imagination.
Laughter and imagination. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Trust me, it'll be a wild ride. You know, as we explore this whole human condition thing, I can't help but think about humor.
Humor? Really? I mean, yeah, laughter's great, but how does that connect to the meaning of life?
Well, think about it. Humor lets us confront these, difficult truths about ourselves, about the world. It's how we cope with the absurdity of it all, finding light in the darkness, you know?
Yeah, like, if I don't laugh, I'll cry.
Exactly. And we've got some sources that dive into the philosophy of humor. Gorgias, an ancient Greek orator known for his wit, he actually declared, "Nothing exists."
Wait, seriously, he just went around saying that nothing exists.
He was a master of irony, loved playing with language. Some scholars think he was using absurdity to, highlight the limitations of language itself, our attempts to define reality.
So like a philosophical roast, using humor to poke fun at the big questions.
Precisely. It reminds us that sometimes the best way to approach those big mysteries is with a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to laugh at ourselves.
I can get behind that. But humor can be tricky, right? Jokes can fall flat, or even worse, offend people.
Oh, absolutely. Humor's subjective. What's funny to one person can be totally offensive to another. There's a fine line between witty satire and just plain meanness.
Like that time a comedian made a joke about a tragedy way too soon. It caused a huge uproar.
Exactly. Even dark humor has its time and place. It takes sensitivity, empathy, understanding your audience.
Okay, so humor can help us process tough stuff, cope with the absurdity of life, and even challenge our perspectives.
But it's a tool that needs to be used carefully.
Got it. So humor, check. What about imagination?
Imagination. Now we're talking. It lets us go beyond the limits of reality, explore different possibilities, create mental worlds, envision different futures.
Like when we daydream or get lost in a good book, escaping the mundane.
Exactly. And those experiences, even if fictional, can enrich our lives. They can deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world.
I remember in college, my friends and I would spend hours just imagining our future lives. We'd write these ridiculous Christmas letters to each other, making up stories about our future careers and families. It was hilarious.
That's a perfect example. While those scenarios were made up, they probably helped you explore different paths you could take.
They definitely did. It was a fun way to play around with different identities, different choices, and that's the power of imagination, right? It lets us try on different hats, see what fits. But can't imagination lead us astray? Like, what if we get so lost in our fantasies that we lose touch with reality?
That's a valid concern. There's a fine line between healthy escapism and delusion. The key is whether our imagination is helping us or holding us back.
I see what you mean.
If it helps us cope with tough emotions, fuels our creativity, inspires positive change, then it's a good thing. But if it makes us deny reality or make bad decisions, that's when it becomes a problem.
It's all about finding that balance, right? Using our imagination to enhance our lives, but not letting it take over.
You got it. And that leads us to another big theme: choice.
Choice. Okay, lay it on me.
Being able to choose, big or small, is part of what makes us human. And it's our choices, maybe even more than our circumstances, that shape our lives and give them meaning.
It's crazy to think about all the choices we make. What to study, who to marry, whether to have kids. Like, what if I had chosen differently? How would things be now?
The weight of choice, right? We agonize over decisions, trying to predict every outcome. There's a ton of research on this: decision fatigue, the paradox of choice.
Where having too many options makes us less happy.
Exactly. We're bombarded with choices every day, each with its own consequences. But how does this relate to the meaning of life?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, if we have the power to choose, then we also have the responsibility to create a life that aligns with our values, our goals, our vision.
So it's not just about making any choice, it's about making meaningful choices. Choices that reflect who we are and what we want to contribute.
Exactly. And Walker Percy captures this beautifully in his novel, The Moviegoer. The main character, Binks, he's lost, feeling empty, so he escapes into movies and books. But then he has this epiphany, realizes he needs to break free from that routine and create his own meaning.
It's like we can't just let life happen to us. We have to engage with it, make choices that lead us towards a more meaningful existence.
And those choices don't have to be huge, life-altering things. They can be small, everyday acts of kindness or creativity or connection.
So it's not about waiting for that one big moment. It's about making the most of the present moment, the choices we have right now.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial theme: the role of ethics and morality in our search for meaning. How do we figure out what's right and wrong? And how does that shape our choices and our sense of meaning?
Ethics and morality. Whew, that feels like a whole other deep dive.
It is. But let's start with a classic, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Sounds simple enough, but I'm sure it gets complicated pretty quickly. Like, what if someone's okay with lying or cheating? Does that make it okay for me to do the same to them?
There you go. That's where it gets tricky. And we've got different ethical frameworks trying to answer those questions. Take utilitarianism, for example. John Stuart Mill, he was a big proponent. He said the goal of morality is to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
So not about individual rights or beliefs, but about maximizing happiness for the majority.
Exactly. Utilitarianism is all about consequences. And action is good if it leads to more happiness than unhappiness overall.
Seems logical, but what about the people who are left out? What about minorities or individuals who might be harmed even if it benefits the majority?
That's a valid critique of utilitarianism. It's tough to calculate all the consequences, and it can sometimes lead to situations where a few people are sacrificed for the greater good.
Okay, so utilitarianism has its flaws. What other options are there?
Well, there's deontology, which is all about duties and obligations, no matter the consequences.
So following the rules, doing what's right. even if it leads to bad outcomes.
Basically, yes. Deontology focuses on universal moral principles like honesty, fairness, and respect.
Sounds noble, but wouldn't that be rigid? What if sticking to the rules actually causes more harm?
Exactly. That's the challenge with any ethical framework. There are always gray areas, tough situations where the right answer isn't clear.
So how do we navigate that? How do we make moral choices when there's no easy answer?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Empathy, open dialogue. We need to go beyond blindly following rules or just chasing happiness and really engage in thoughtful discussions about what it means to live ethically.
So it's about considering different perspectives, the well-being of others, and using our critical thinking skills to make informed decisions.
Precisely. And this circles back to Peter Singer and his challenge to our moral compass. Remember the drowning child? He uses that to show the gap between what we say we believe and how we actually behave.
Right. Most of us would say we have a moral duty to save a drowning child.
Right.
But Singer pushes us further and asks, why don't we feel that same obligation to help those suffering from poverty, disease, or war around the world?
It's a tough question that makes us examine our priorities. Are we truly living by our values, or are we just ignoring those outside our immediate circle?
Ouch. That hits close to home.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the suffering in the world and just shut down.
It is. We see images and stories of suffering constantly. It can lead to compassion fatigue. But that doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to be ethical and compassionate.
So how do we break through that? How do we cultivate a sense of moral responsibility that goes beyond our own little bubble?
It starts with recognizing our biases, educating ourselves about the challenges others face, and making choices that align with our values.
Okay, that feels empowering. But before we go out and try to save the world, let's bring it back to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
How do we balance our desire for personal fulfillment with that responsibility to the greater good?
The million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And there's no single answer. But a big part of it is finding a sense of purpose, one that resonates with our values and with a desire to make a positive impact.
So it's not an either, it's a both hand. Finding that sweet spot where our passions meet the needs of others.
Exactly. And that purpose doesn't have to be some grand, world-changing thing. It can be as simple as being a good friend, a loving parent, a dedicated teacher. It's about finding meaning in the everyday, in the small things.
Okay, that feels more manageable. Honestly, after this deep dive into ethics, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Is there a way to simplify all this, like one guiding principle?
Ingmar Bergman's film Fanny and Alexander offers a really beautiful reminder.
Fanny and Alexander. Okay, tell me more.
Towards the end, there's this wise grandmother. She says, "The world is a den of thieves, and night is falling. Evil breaks its chains and runs through the world like a mad dog. The poison affects us all. No one escapes. Therefore, let us be happy while we are happy. Let us be kind, generous, affectionate, and good. It is necessary and not at all shameful to take pleasure in the little world."
Wow, that's really beautiful. It acknowledges the darkness, but also encourages us to embrace the light, the good stuff, the little joys.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the meaning of life isn't about finding some big solution or reaching some perfect state of being. It's about appreciating the moments we have, being loving and kind, and making the world a little bit better, even when things are tough.
Okay, that brings back the warm fuzzies. But before we wrap up this part, I have one more question.
Shoot.
We've talked about spirituality, the unknowable, but what about organized religion?
Wow, religion. It's complex, often controversial, but it's definitely tied to our search for meaning.
Right, for a lot of people, religion provides a framework for understanding the world, a community, moral guidelines.
Absolutely. And we have some sources that explore different perspectives on that.
Okay, let's dive in. Where do we start?
How about Sam Harris, a modern atheist philosopher? He argues that religion can be dangerous, especially when it leads to intolerance and violence.
That's a strong statement. What's his reasoning?
Well, Harris believes that religious beliefs are inherently divisive. They create an us versus them mentality.
Yeah, I can see how that leads to conflict. But hasn't religion also inspired incredible acts of compassion and generosity? Think about the good that religious organizations do.
No, for sure. Harris acknowledges that. But he argues that those same good deeds can be motivated by secular ethics. We don't need supernatural beliefs to be good.
So it's not about religion versus atheism. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and working together to make the world better, regardless of our beliefs.
Exactly. And this brings us to Francis Bacon. He offered a more nuanced take on reason and faith.
Francis Bacon, the scientific method guy. What's he got to say about religion?
Bacon believed that religion and science should be separate, But he also thought that acknowledging the limits of human knowledge could lead to a deeper appreciation for the mysteries of the universe.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
He famously said, "A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion."
Whoa, that's a lot to unpack. Is he saying the more we learn about the world, the more we realize how much we don't know? And that makes us open to the possibility of something beyond our understanding.
Precisely. Bacon believed there are things we can't fully grasp through reason alone, recognizing that vast unknown can lead to awe and wonder, a feeling that many consider spiritual, even religious.
Like when you look at the stars and feel overwhelmed by the vastness of it all, it's humbling, but also amazing.
Exactly. And that sense of awe can be a powerful source of meaning, whether you're religious or not.
So it's not about having all the answers, but embracing the mystery, the things we'll never fully know.
Exactly. Which brings us to Thomas Nagel, a modern philosopher known for his work on consciousness.
Thomas Nagel,
Wow.
isn't he the one who said, "I hope there is no God"?
The one and only. It might seem strange coming from someone who thinks so deeply about these big questions.
It does. Why would he say
Yeah.
that?
Nagel's reasoning is fascinating. He argues that if there were a God, it would mean there's a preset plan, that our lives are basically predetermined. And he finds that idea really unsettling.
It's that existentialist idea again, right? The freedom to create our own meaning.
Exactly. Nagel believes a godless universe allows for real human freedom and creativity.
But he goes even further. He says, I want atheism to be true, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God, it's that I hope there is no God. I don't want the universe to be like that.
It shows how deeply he feels about this, right? It's not just intellectual, it's deeply personal.
So it's not just what we believe, it's also about how we want reality to be.
Absolutely. Nagel highlights how reason, emotion, and personal values all play into how we understand life's meaning.
Okay, so we've got intolerance, awe, and mystery, and a yearning for a godless universe. What are we supposed to make of all this?
That's the beauty of it. There's no single answer. It's about figuring out what resonates with you, what aligns with your own values and experiences.
So it's about personal exploration, thinking critically, and engaging with different views, even ones that challenge us.
Exactly. And that brings us to a source that offers a really powerful vision of a meaningful life. The Old Testament.
The Old Testament. Okay, which part?
Let's focus on Isaiah, specifically the passage describing this messianic banquet. On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wines, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken.
Wow, that's powerful imagery. A feast for everyone, an end to suffering and death, a world without sadness or shame.
It's a vision of a transformed world where peace, justice, and abundance reign. It speaks to our deepest longing for a world without pain, where love and compassion win out.
Okay, but let's be real. That sounds like a fantasy, right?
Of course. But that doesn't mean we should just dismiss it. Even if we don't take it literally, the passage can inspire us to work toward a better world. A future where everyone has enough food, shelter, a life without suffering.
I see your point. It's about holding on to hope, that vision of a better world, even if we know it might not fully come true.
Exactly. It's about finding meaning in the journey, in our efforts to create a more just and compassionate world, even if we don't see the end result.
Okay, so the Old Testament, with its visions and teachings, can provide a framework for meaning and purpose. But what about those who don't identify with religion? Where do they find meaning?
That's where Pascal's contemplation of the universe comes in again. Remember that sense of awe and wonder?
Right, that feeling of being terrified and amazed at the same time, realizing we're these tiny beings in this huge universe.
Exactly. That feeling can be a powerful source of meaning, whether you're religious or not.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. It's about embracing the mystery, the unknown. Those questions we'll probably never have definitive answers to.
Precisely. And this leads us to a source that explores spirituality and the meaning of life in a particularly mind-bending way. The concept of extra dimensions.
Extra dimensions. Okay, now you've lost me. Are we talking science fiction here?
Not exactly. While it might sound like Star Trek, the idea of extra dimensions is a serious area of study in physics.
Okay, I'm willing to go with you on this. Tell me more.
Theoretical physicists like Frank Close Explore the possibility that there are more dimensions than the ones we can perceive, length, width, height, and time.
So there could be hidden dimensions we can't see or experience.
Exactly. And they propose these extra dimensions to explain some things that don't fit our current understanding of physics. For example, subatomic particles, called neutrinos, they act like they're popping in and out of these extra dimensions.
Okay, my brain is officially hurting. But how does this relate to the meaning of life?
Well, if there are these hidden dimensions, it suggests there might be more to reality than we can even imagine.
That's a pretty mind-blowing thought. So even if we don't understand them, just the possibility opens up a whole new world of wonder.
Exactly. It suggests there might be layers of reality beyond our current understanding, and that's both humbling and inspiring.
Okay, I can feel that existential awe creeping back in. So even without concrete proof, the idea of extra dimensions can spark our imagination and make us wonder about the universe.
Absolutely. It pushes us to think beyond what we can see and embrace the mystery of the unknown.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with religion, from intolerance to awe and wonder, utopian visions to extra dimensions. Phew, I need a minute to process all of this.
Take your time. This meaning of life thing, it's a lifelong journey, and we all approach it differently.
Okay, I'm ready for the next step. Where do we go from here?
Let's shift our focus from the vastness of the universe to something a bit more internal: consciousness.
Consciousness. Now we're really diving deep.
We are. It's one of the most fundamental but also most elusive things about being human. What does it mean to be aware, to experience the world subjectively? How does that impact our search for meaning?
Those are definitely big questions.
They are, but we've got some brilliant minds to help us explore them.
Lead the way.
Let's start with Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher who said the meaning of life is in the present moment.
Wittgenstein. But wasn't he focused on language and logic? How does that connect to consciousness?
Wittgenstein believed that language limits our understanding of consciousness. We try to express this experience of awareness using words, but words can only go so far.
It's like trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had it, right?
Hmm.
Words can only do so much.
Exactly. He argued that we need to go beyond language, beyond conceptual thinking to really grasp consciousness.
Okay, but how? If words fail us, how can we even begin to understand it?
Wittgenstein believed the key was to focus on our immediate experience. Pay attention to the raw sensations, perceptions, and feelings that make up our conscious awareness.
So, like mindfulness, being present, paying attention to the flow of our experience without trying to label it.
You got it. And here's a fascinating quote from Wittgenstein. If by eternity is understood not endless temporal duration but timelessness, then eternal life belongs to those who live in the present.
Whoa. Okay, break that down for me. How does living in the present relate to eternal life?
He suggests that by fully being in the present moment, letting go of the past and worries about the future, we can experience a sense of timelessness, a sense of eternity.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. It's not about living forever, but about experiencing that timelessness, that connection to something bigger, right here, right now.
Exactly. And this brings us to another great mind, William James.
William James, the pragmatist, what's his take on consciousness?
James believed that consciousness isn't a thing, but a process. It's a constant flow of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, always changing.
So not a static object, but more like a river, always flowing.
Exactly. And James argued that this stream of consciousness is what gives our lives meaning and purpose.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does a stream of thoughts and feelings lead to meaning and purpose?
James believed our consciousness isn't just receiving information, but actively shaping our experience.
So we're not just reacting to stimuli, we're actively interpreting and making meaning out of our experiences.
Precisely. And that active meaning-making is what gives our lives purpose and direction.
That's a powerful thought. We're not just passengers, we're the drivers, shaping our own experience.
Exactly. And this brings us to a concept that's closely linked to consciousness: the self.
The self. Okay, now we're getting philosophical. What do we even mean by the self? Is it our personality, our identity, our soul?
All good questions, and there are tons of perspectives on that. But for now, let's focus on one that challenges the idea of a fixed, unchanging self.
Okay, I'm ready for a challenge.
Buddhist philosophy teaches that the self isn't a permanent thing, but a constantly changing collection of mental and physical states.
So we don't have this solid core that defines who we are.
Right. Buddhist teachings describe the self as 5 aggregates, or khandhas: form our body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. So the self is like a shifting combination of these five things.
Precisely. And that has big implications for how we think about meaning.
Okay, I'm curious. How so?
If the self isn't fixed, but constantly changing, then our sense of meaning and purpose has to be fluid too.
So it's not about finding some ultimate truth, but embracing the journey, the constant flux and change.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly liberating. It frees us from the pressure of finding some big overarching meaning and allows us to find meaning in the everyday, in the simple act of being alive.
Okay, that's beautiful.
Hmm.
But it also makes me a little anxious. If the self is always changing, doesn't that make life feel chaotic?
It can, sure, but it can also be exciting. It means we have the power to shape and reshape our sense of self, our purpose, as we go through life.
So it's not about clinging to a fixed identity or belief system. It's about being open to change, to growth, to becoming something new.
Exactly. And this brings us back to Viktor Frankl and his message about finding meaning in suffering.
I love Frankl's work. The idea that we can choose our attitude in any situation, even the hardest ones.
It's powerful, right? He believed we can find meaning even in the midst of suffering by choosing how we respond, finding purpose in our actions, and connecting to something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, I'm feeling that sense of hope again, but I have one more question about this changing self idea.
Go for it.
If the self isn't fixed, if it's always evolving, does that mean there's no such thing as a true self?
That's a great question, and one that's been debated for ages. But from a Buddhist perspective, the idea of a true self is kind of misleading.
Okay, I'm listening.
Buddhist teachings suggest the self is a collection of changing mental and physical states, but there's no underlying essence that stays the same.
So it's not about finding some hidden true self, but accepting the fluidity of who we are.
Exactly. And that acceptance can be freeing. We can let go of the need to define ourselves rigidly and embrace the changing nature of our experience.
Okay, that's powerful.
Mm.
But it makes me wonder, if there's no true self, what's the point of all this?
Mm.
What's the point of searching for meaning if the thing we're searching for is always changing?
That's a great question. And it takes us to the core of the Buddhist understanding of meaning.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into the heart of Buddhism.
Buddhism teaches that the root of all suffering is attachment. Attachment to our desires, our beliefs, our sense of self.
Okay, I've heard that before.
It's a powerful insight, isn't it? We cling to things, to ideas, to identities, believing they'll bring us happiness, security. But in reality, everything's impermanent, everything's in flux.
Yeah, I mean, we've all experienced loss, disappointment, things not going according to plan.
Exactly. And those experiences often show us how pointless it is to cling to things we can't control.
So, if attachment is the root of suffering, then the path to happiness is letting go.
Precisely. Buddhism teaches that by cultivating detachment, releasing our grip on desires, on our sense of self, we can reach enlightenment, a state of lasting peace and fulfillment.
I'm starting to see the appeal of Buddhism, but this detachment thing, it sounds a bit cold, impersonal.
Hmm.
Don't our passions, our loves, our connections make life worth living?
That's a common misunderstanding about detachment. It's not about becoming emotionless or indifferent. It's about changing how we relate to our experiences, our desires, our sense of self.
Okay, go on.
Think of it this way. Imagine holding a bird in your hand. If you squeeze too tight, you'll crush it. But if you open your hand, give it the freedom to fly, it soars to new heights.
That's a beautiful analogy. So detachment is about finding that balance between holding on and letting go.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everything changes, that clinging only causes suffering. Happiness comes from embracing the flow of life, the ever-changing nature of experience.
I think I'm starting to get it. Letting go of control, finding peace in the present moment, in what is rather than what we wish it to be.
Precisely. And this brings us back to how to live a meaningful life in a world that can feel chaotic and full of suffering.
Right. After this deep dive, I feel like I've been thrown into the deep end of an existential pool.
Well, the key takeaway is that meaning isn't given to us, it's something we create. Through our choices, our actions, our relationships.
So it's about taking ownership of our lives and making choices that reflect what we believe in, how we want to shape the world.
Exactly. And those choices don't have to be huge, dramatic things. They can be small, everyday acts of kindness, creativity, connection.
So not waiting for some big life-altering moment, but making the most of right now, the choices we have in front of us.
Precisely. And that brings us to a source that offers a profound perspective on the meaning of life, the Bhagavad Gita.
The Bhagavad Gita, we touched on it earlier, with swadharma, or duty. What else does it say about meaning?
The Bhagavad Gita is full of wisdom about living a meaningful and fulfilling life. One of its central teachings is about selfless action, or karma yoga.
Selfless action. Tell me more.
Karma yoga is about doing things without being attached to the outcome, without seeking personal gain or reward.
That sounds tough. Isn't it natural to want recognition? To hope good things come from our actions?
Of course, but the Bhagavad Gita teaches that by detaching ourselves from the results, by focusing on the action itself, not the potential rewards, we can find inner peace and liberation.
So finding joy in the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. This applies to all aspects of life: work, relationships, spiritual practices.
So it's a shift from what we can get to what we can give, from self-gratification to selfless service.
Precisely. And that shift can bring a deep sense of meaning and purpose.
That makes sense. But I have another question about selfless action.
Go ahead.
If we're not supposed to care about the results, not seek personal gain, what's the point of doing anything? Won't that lead to apathy?
That's a good point. But the Bhagavad Gita isn't advocating for passivity. It teaches us to act with passion and dedication, but without obsessing over specific results.
Okay, so striking a balance between effort and surrender, action and acceptance.
Exactly. That balance is key for a meaningful life.
I think I'm getting it. Being present, giving our all, but also letting go of the need to control everything, accepting that things might not go as planned.
Precisely. And that acceptance can bring peace and liberation.
Wow. What a deep dive this has been. We've covered so much. Ancient wisdom, modern dilemmas, the vastness of the universe, the complexity of the human mind.
It's been quite a journey, and honestly, we've only scratched the surface of this endlessly fascinating topic.
I know, right? But I think we've given our listeners a good foundation to explore the meaning of life on their own.
I hope so. Remember, the meaning of life isn't something you passively absorb. It's a lifelong journey of self-discovery.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought.
Please do.
The meaning of life isn't a destination, it's a direction. It's not about getting all the answers, it's about asking the right questions. It's not about reaching some perfect state, it's about embracing the beauty and the messiness of the journey itself.
Beautifully said.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep living. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious, keep your hearts open, and don't forget to like and subscribe.